Excellent. Well, thanks very much. It's nice to have a kind of a slightly smaller group. Actually, we've been doing these types of things for a while, and sometimes it becomes a little bit not interactive. It's a little bit like talking into the void. So it's really nice to kind of see some faces and actually do some sort of face-to-face engagement for a change. So today we'll quickly run through a little bit about the project, let you know a little bit where we are with it in terms of the program. And then we'll go on to kind of talk about where we think there might be some opportunities. And once I've gone through a few little bits, I'll hand over to my colleague Michael, who, as he said, is from the Mainworks contractor, which is operating in this particular area, and he'll be able to give you a little bit of information on kind of what's happening and where they see potential opportunities as well. So just before we start, my name is Matt Hadlington. I'm a Senior Business Engagement Manager at HS2. So my role sits within the Community Engagement Directorate of the project. And I'm kind of tasked with working with our contractors to try and bring local businesses into the project wherever we can. It's not always possible, so it's a lot about kind of raising awareness and understanding as well, but also, yeah, my real goal on the project is to try and get local businesses involved. So just a bit on the project. It's the largest infrastructure project in Europe. This is a huge undertaking. It's the biggest thing that anybody's tried to do since the Victorian era in terms of railways. So far, we've contracted about £10 billion into the supply chain already, and we're expecting that number to double in the next year. So it's going to end up mobilising a supply chain on a pretty unprecedented scale. So it's a big project, and with it will come a lot of challenges and a lot of opportunities. So just on the project itself, in case you aren't aware of kind of what it is and where it goes, HS2 will stop at over 25 stations from Scotland to the southeast, including 8 of Britain's 10 largest cities, and we're building the project in 3 phases. Hopefully you can just see that underneath the end of that map it's London Euston. So the dark blue phase is what we call phase 1 of the project, which is essentially from the West Midlands down to London. That's the bit that we're primarily going to talk about today. That's the bit that we're already underway working on. It's the bit that Michael's building, well, not on his own, but with his partners and his contractors. It's the bit that probably would bring the current opportunities to life the most. Phase 2A, which is in the slightly lighter blue, goes up from the Birmingham area up to Crewe. That's currently going through Parliament. In September, it continued its passage through Parliament and had its second reading in the House of Lords. So the bill is now at the next stage, where a select committee will look at the petitions against the bill. And we hope that it will have royal assent by the end of the year, so that we can start to think about contracts and construction in that part of the world as well. Then phase 2B, which completes the network up to Manchester and Leeds, is still in the design phase, and we expect that to start its kind of journey through Parliament next year. It's a transformational project. It's quite hard to get your head around kind of just how much it could impact the way things work. So the one thing that always kind of gives me a little bit of a feel for the scale of it and the sort of the impact of it is, if you lived in North London, say, when this project's finished, phase 1 of this project, Birmingham Airport would become your closest airport in terms of the journey times to and from. So in terms of, you know, we talk a lot about speed, so that's the kind of thing that always sticks in my head as, okay, well that starts you to help to understand how that could transform that Birmingham area a little bit. And secondly, the other thing I think is the number of trains per hour, so 16 trains per hour. It's kind of like, I guess, like a tube style service. You know, if you miss the train, you get on the next one. That's kind of a bit of a paradigm shift in terms of how we think about railways in this country. So a huge opportunity there. So I thought it'd be worth just giving you a quick update on where we are with things. So earlier in February, we got the green light from government after what was we called the OKV review, which was an independent review into the project. And that came out with positive recommendations, a few things around the edges that we needed to change that we've looked at, but essentially the green light for the project. And then in April this year, which was probably our biggest milestone to date on phase 1 of the project, we got what we call notice to proceed, which is essentially the go-ahead for the 4 main works civils contractors who Michael works for to start work on the project. So that was a really big moment for us. That kind of started to allow, I guess, in simplest terms, some of the flow of money to come down from government and through HS2 into the contractors to start actually building, buying and delivering. It would be remiss of me not to mention COVID-19. We're all on a call like this, which is not the way we would normally do these things. It's actually, for us from the engagement side, it's been quite interesting and quite beneficial. We've managed to get a lot of digital platforms up and running that we have always had aspiration to do, but never really managed to finish. And we've had to do that, and now it's all working quite nicely. But in terms of out on the site, we're working closely with the construction partners to review works. When the crisis originally kind of started, things paused. We assessed everything, and we're currently working in line with Public Health England advice. I think around 95% of our sites are now open, but we're taking various measures at different sites to kind of make sure people are working safely. We're also not really venturing into communities from our sites at the moment. One of the big positives of this project is that our workers will use local businesses, but at the moment that's kind of not really happening because we're kind of pretty much working in bubbles, and we'll continue to work within the guidance as that carries on. So just a little bit on kind of the supply chain side of things. So I think, and apologies if this is a bit simple for some of you who I'm sure will know all about how these infrastructure projects work. But I think a lot of people kind of assume that HS2 Ltd is one project and you would go and get a contract directly with them, but that's not how it works. HS2 Ltd is essentially the project management arm of government. We tend to let a very small number of extremely high value contracts in the high millions and often in the billions, depending on what's going on. So we do let some smaller contracts, but they tend to be let through government frameworks, which are far more complicated, far more complex, and we don't tend to let a lot of contracts ourselves. We let a significant number of a small number of significantly large contracts to what we call our tier 1 joint ventures. Michael and EK are an example of that. And they would then bring in their delivery partners to actually build the railway, and they would then go out into the wider supply chain. So depending on the size and nature of your business, it's unlikely that you would directly contract with HS2 Ltd. It's not possible. There are some SMEs working with us already, but it would be more likely that you would probably end up being involved through our tier 1 joint ventures or through their delivery partners. So it's just a bit of a high level overview of that. So in terms of that, how we've kind of we're building the railway, we've broken up the work into multiple contracts across several large construction companies, and here's a bit of an update kind of on where we are with our procurement. So enabling works, which are the things you need to do to clear the way for main construction work. These contractors are in place and they've been out and about since 2017. So they've been delivering things like the diversion of services, clearance of site, archaeology work, environmental work, relocation of species, some vegetation clearance, some of the more controversial things that are associated with the project. They've been out and about doing those already. And they're kind of clearing the way for the main construction to start, which will be delivered by the main works civils contractors. That's the really big stuff, the tunnels, the bridges, big ticket items. So following the notice to proceed earlier in April that I mentioned, these contractors are now starting to ramp up the work, getting out and about, mobilizing sites and starting to buy things. We also have stations contracts. And we've awarded contracts at Euston and Old Oak Common in West London. And the 2 contracts for the West Midlands stations are still going through the process and yet to be awarded. We think that for every big contract we award, there will be literally thousands of opportunities for businesses further down the supply chain. So we think in total, the project will generate around 400,000 supply chain contract opportunities. for UK business, and that's during phase 1 between the Midlands and London. We expect about 2/3 of those to go to SMEs, and opportunities will be across a range of sectors. Michael will talk a little bit more about EK and what they do, and where those opportunities might come a little bit later on. But it's also just worth mentioning we're out tendering for the trains at the moment for the rolling stock. So there are some large bidders involved in that, and we're also launching our railway system contracts at the moment as well. So that's for things like signalling, the tracks, and all the technical equipment that's needed to run the railway. So that's a really high level overview of kind of where we are with the project, how we're approaching building it. So I'm just going to hand over to Michael to quickly introduce himself and talk through EK a little bit, and then I'll come back afterwards and talk a bit more about the some of the opportunities as we see them. Okay.
Thank you, Matt. I suppose a good opportunity to maybe break quickly if there's any questions on what Matt presented there.
Yeah, good idea.
Into more contractor specific stuff. Is there any questions on what Matt's presented so far?
Michael, can I just say you're very quiet actually, Michael.
Sorry. There you go. That's better.
There you go. That's better.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Because I'm drinking tea.
Well, that's made a huge difference.
Yeah.
I mean, this might come up as you go through, but one of the things that's of interest to us as the chamber is I mean, there's a number of things, and you're covering those this morning, but one of the aspects is your kind of, I guess, your liaison, Matt, with organisations that represent business and the public across the region, so the London to Birmingham section. You're liaising with us, which is brilliant, and we held an event just before lockdown with you regarding some plans for some roadworks around the Banbury motorway junction, for example. Are you liaising with other groups, you know, in other counties, and sort of, I suppose I'm thinking close to Banbury, but there's a Bicester groups and other areas in Northamptonshire and Warwickshire.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
we can kind of feel that how we connect in with others that do similar things to us in different areas, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess there's two parts to that. In terms of the kind of impacts and the construction and what's happening, and kind of when there might be road closures or noise or vibration, things that businesses might be interested. We have a community engagement team, which I'm in the same directorate as, who specifically look after that aspect. So they would tend to go out through things like parish councils and local community groups to kind of share that information, and they work across kind of HS2 Ltd and EK, the main works contractor. So there's a kind of joint team of community engagement people who talk about the kind of impacts piece, I suppose. And then there's me and my team, and we, luckily, fortunately for me, I only really talk about the positive and the proactive opportunity piece around the supply chain. So so I would talk to organisations like yourself, and we're talking to Bicester Vision and other people up and down the route, kind of chambers, LEPs, growth hubs, all of those kinds of organisations. And we're increasingly starting to talk to kind of bid groups and high street groups as well, to kind of understand impacts. But those two things, although they kind of sit quite separately, I would sort of provide, I guess, a link to the kind of impact side of things as well. So if there are specific questions you as a representative of a business group or a set of businesses had, or concerns, like, you could bring those to me, and I wouldn't necessarily be able to deal with them myself, but I can go into the business and find the right people from the impact side to come and talk to you about that. And we quite often do joint presentations around that sort of thing as well.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, some of this I perhaps could say at the end, but as we're talking about it now, please do sort of remain a link with us as Banbury Chamber, but in particular regarding kind of impacts on road closures, impact on motorway junctions, those types of things, as you do implement various various schemes, from introducing traffic lights,
Yeah,
and those types of things.
there's a few things at the end actually that we can touch on, but I can give you some places to go that, you know, I mean, always come and ask me. That's absolutely fine. I'm more than happy to do that. But there are some kind of places you can go and register where you'll get automated and impact kind of information up front.
Yeah. And if you want to do or suggest any more, I know you are, but as we go forward, any more joint events with, say, Bicester Vision covering, because we'll all have the same kind of interests in North Oxfordshire or other groups into South Warwickshire or South Northamptonshire, then, you know, we can do some joint events where you're sharing information across a number of areas to make it more efficient as well.
Yeah, I'm sure that's something we'd love to look at, definitely.
Okay. All right. And you liaise with the district council. So I know we've got Stephen here from Cherwell. So do you kind of, presumably there's a need to liaise with, I know.
Yeah, on the impact side, the community engagement team, sort of the area teams would do that. But we're increasingly, as a business engagement team, starting to talk to people from economic development. I mean, especially at the moment, I think, you know, as we sort of go into this recovery phase, I think as a project, we recognise that whilst we're clearly not going to fix everything, there are some opportunities that come with us coming to town, if you like. So we're quite keen to talk to economic regeneration teams and development officers as well. So we're starting to do more of that. I think previously we kept it at chambers and LEPs and growth hubs, but we're definitely kind of starting to expand that.
Okay, all right, thanks. That's all from me for now.
Cool.
Okay, great, thank you. I suppose just before I jump in, as a contractor, so as a delivery contractor, we're set up very similar in that we've got engagement teams that are looking at impact on communities, diversions, logistics, people. And then the team that I work in terms of a supply chain engagement, skills and employment focus, and the benefits side of what we're hoping to bring to the local communities. We do try and separate those. They are two different types of engagement. And if we're talking about mitigation and things that may be issue related, then it's quite difficult to bolt on benefits at the end of that if you're mitigating impact. So yeah, we're set up very similar to HS2 in that respect. So thank you for the opportunity this morning. Really pleased to meet you guys, and keen to explain a little bit more in detail about who we are, the joint venture that I work for, and the work that we'll be delivering in that central section. So EKFB is a joint venture between 4 companies there: Eiffage, Kia, Ferrovial, and BAM. We've actually been on this HS2 contract and journey since 2015 as a joint venture. It was set up slightly different in 2015, but we have been working on this contract since 2015 in developing bids and proposals, design plans, implementation plans, and so on. And as Matt mentioned earlier, we were awarded notice to proceed earlier this year, which is really what we've been working towards in terms of we have an agreeable price for the section of work, we have an agreeable plan, and agreeable design, so that we can actually get on and start doing the work that we've been planning the last 4 or 5 years to deliver. You'll probably recognise some of the joint venture partners there. Kia are a very big UK-based infrastructure contract. BAM equally. Ferrovial have worked on a number of major projects across the UK. And Eiffage are a French contractor that build high-speed rail, so they're a high-speed rail specialist, and they built a huge 250-kilometre high-speed rail project recently called BPL in France. So they bring a lot of expertise from a technical high-speed rail point of view. If you want to flick to the next slide, please, Matt. Thank you. So a little bit more detail on our section of work. So we start our work at Chiltern Tunnels in the southern section, south of Aylesbury, and work our way up through Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire, bit of Warwickshire, up to Long Itchington, where there's another tunnel at Long Itchington that another contractor takes over. It's a huge earthworks job in that we are getting the embankments and the track ready before we actually lay the physical track. So it's a huge earthworks moving project. There's a huge amount of structures, infrastructure interfaces across, whether it's roads, other railway projects. And our approach is to, or will be, to split it up into 5 different sub-projects. It's a 80-kilometre project, so it's a huge area to cover. And we'll split it up into 5 sections that will be dealt with separately in terms, some of them may be subcontracted out to a separate delivery partner, one of our strategic partners. There will be an element of self-delivery that we will do ourselves as a JV in terms of us employing the people directly. And then we'll be working with strategic partners across that section of work, across the 5 sections. So just highlighting the geographical split there of North Chiltern, Aylesbury, Calvert, Twyford to Greatworth, and Greatworth to Southam at the northern section. Calvert area is a very difficult area in terms of interfaces with East-West Rail. So there's a lot of activity going on there at the moment. It'll probably be one of our main focus areas to start with because of those interfaces. If you can flick over, Matt, thank you. So a little bit more detail on our program. We've mentioned notice to proceed a couple of times, which was awarded in early 2020. Really, this year is all about our preparation and mobilisation work. So getting our compounds ready to deliver the physical works out on site, acquisition of land, a huge amount of procurement activity, which is really what we're keen to talk to you about in a little bit more detail and provide some information about where we can signpost potential suppliers, how we can support local suppliers, how we're looking at identifying a mixture of local SMEs, underrepresented businesses, and really trying to get into the detail of how we can support local businesses and what we need to do to support them onto the project. Matt mentioned earlier that there's often a misconception that people will be contracting with HS2 directly, and even with EKFB directly. These are huge contracts that we're awarding, and we're keen to try and facilitate access to companies to allow them to contract with possibly tier 2, tier 3 suppliers to our supply chain. So that's essentially what myself and my team do or will be doing to identify the local businesses, support them with the opportunities, signposting people to different procurement websites, and trying to incentivize our supply chain to do the right thing in terms of local business to demonstrate a genuine return on investment. Next, please, Matt. Thank you. So there's a little bit of an overview here of our scoping numbers, I suppose. I mentioned that really the majority of our work is earthworks. So bottom right, 30 million cubic meters of excavation, which is a huge undertaking from an earthworks point of view. Obviously machine driven in terms of excavators, dump trucks, diggers, dozers, across a huge section of the contract. At peak, we think we're likely to need between 4,000 and 5,000 people in this central section to support us delivering the works. That is directly in delivering the works. Obviously the opportunities as we get into the wider supply chain in terms of support services, additional support for the contractor, it's potentially unlimited, the opportunities. There's a huge amount of overbridges, 75 overbridges that will need building, so huge requirements there from a resource point of view. Viaducts, something called green tunnels. I'm not sure if you've seen the details on these, but there's 5 kilometers of green tunnels, which are interesting, and not something we've built a huge amount of in the UK, and it's something our French partners have brought over, and what they've done, they've built a lot of those in Europe. Next slide, please, Matt. So a very basic snapshot. I mentioned the opportunities sort of outside of our direct procurement, are huge, but this just gives an overview of the number of packages that we will be procuring directly over the next 18 months. Focus package, mainly value driven at the moment, in that we're focusing on the larger packages of work, which are aggregates, plant, both acquisition of earthworks plant, but also plant hire as well to support the project. Labour, so subcontract labour is a huge contract that we're procuring at the moment, and then just looking at different options around things like sleeping accommodation, procurement of materials, PPE, small tools. They're all huge value contracts that we're currently in the process of procuring. So next slide, please, Matt. So I suppose to give a brief overview of how we actually do that. So HS2 obviously is taxpayers' money, and we need to demonstrate that we follow a fair and clear procurement process. All of our opportunities, our direct opportunities, are advertised on Compete For. We have our own page that details the procurement opportunities, the value, and companies are open to upload their details into Compete For. You select which activities you are able to deliver, essentially, and then you can keep in regular contact with the opportunities that we offer. We do that initial we do an initial sort of common assessment standard through Compete For, that we do an initial basic assessment to understand if that business is or has the capacity to deliver the contract, and then we go into a procurement process, so a lockdown procurement process, which is, depending on the package, is split between a mixture of technical delivery, price, and then quality and value add. And we've done quite an interesting exercise where we've developed a balanced scorecard, or a heat mapped balanced scorecard, where we've assessed each of our procurement opportunities and the potential impact that opportunity could have in different areas. So if we are procuring a piece of software, let's say, we would quite heavily weight the procurement of a software package towards technical and price, because from a local quality and impact in terms of making a difference locally, it's unlikely that a software package would be able to have a huge amount of impact on local people, local businesses. I mean, it doesn't mean we don't encourage local companies to potentially procure or have the opportunity to tender for it, but it's just the impact that we're able to have locally. Whereas if you look at labour and recruitment of labour, that has a huge impact on people locally. Opportunities for people, opportunities for local businesses to train people. So we'd heavily weight that package towards skills and employment, equality and diversity, and the more quality side. So I think, unfortunately, Paddy's dropped off the call, but Paddy is we recently joined us as skills and employment manager to focus on that, essentially. So how we're going to drive that agenda locally. Apprenticeships, and how we're going to support employing people that are potentially out of work locally. We're involved in a couple of redundancy task force groups that have popped up recently because of the COVID-19 situation, and how we can support local people. and we've already done a fair bit in the training space as well. We secured some funding from the CITB last year to deliver training for new entrants into the construction industry. Trained 400 people locally with a view to them hopefully joining the project at some point in the future. We've just had an extension on some additional funding this year where we're looking to train 200 plant operators that we're hoping will join the project at some point next year. Our main earthworks season really starts next year. So yeah, a huge amount of activity on a huge scale, but conscious. We try to get into the detail of how local businesses can get involved and the different packages that are suitable for local businesses, and that's where the balanced scorecard approach comes in the heat mapping exercise that we're currently going through. Yeah, so that's where we are. We're in terms of staff, I suppose, and highlight what we've been doing this year. We had a team of about 120 people last year, so as we got to December, it's about 120 people. We've massively ramped up this year, so we've recruited 200 people in this year since January, which hasn't been easy with the lockdown, obviously, but we've got quite used to doing video interviews and phones being sent to people's houses. We're onboarding people remotely. We think that we'll employ a direct team of probably 700 people that work for EKFB directly. We'll have a head office in Milton Keynes, and then there'll be offices, 5 main compound offices in those sections that I showed you earlier, with the most northerly section being up near Southam. And hopefully this year is really about mobilizing those compounds and getting those offices ready. And then the teams will start to engage a bit more locally with local people.
Cool. Thanks, Michael. That leads into, and I'm sure hopefully we'll have some time for a conversation about some of that stuff. But that leads into kind of what, so other presentations that we do, other things, other places that we've been to talk to. I think one of the focuses is to try and get people and businesses to think about, and this slide's come up a bit funny, sorry, but about that it's not just tracks and trains. So when Michael talks about compounds and things like that, there's a huge amount of stuff that kind of comes along with the project that I don't think people think about. So, creative services, photographers, printers, signage companies, food and catering doesn't just mean kind of kitchen setups and mobile caterers on site. Could be catering for meetings and events that we hold, of which there will be a lot. Accommodation is something that's really, really going to be a challenge for these guys in the central part of the route. There's an awful lot of B&Bs and hotels and private rentals in the Buckinghamshire area and the sort of Chilwell area and all the way through that central part of the route. But do we want to use all of those and take it away from the existing market? Probably not. So there's a real challenge there. We're talking about accommodation on site, employee services. So all these direct people, 4,000 or 5,000 people that Michael's talking about, they're going to need things to do. They're going to need health and well-being services, gyms, dentists, hairdressers, things to do with their families. So there's a lot of stuff there. Transport and logistics could be taxi hire, to and from site transport, logistics planning, transport management, things like banksman. And trade and construction isn't just track and trains. It could be things that we need on the compound site, so building materials, electrical, plumbing, that kind of thing. And then the sites need looking after in terms of cleaning, landscaping, waste management, site security. So this isn't kind of an exhaustive list, but the idea is to sort of illustrate that it's not just what you possibly imagine when you think about HS2 in terms of tracks and trains. So
I think so. Just to jump in there, sorry, Matt.
Yeah, of course.
You just flip back to that slide a second. There's also a balance here as well. And you mentioned, Matt mentioned accommodation, in that there's likely to be an influx of construction workers. It's obviously going to happen that there will be some people that will be travelling or temporary accommodation or living or potentially staying in B&Bs and hotels. But there is a balance there. So we are quite conscious that we don't want to, or we can't, not that we don't want to, we can't book up all of the B&Bs and hotels locally for the next 4 years. It just, we can't operate in that way. So we're looking at how we can utilize the what's on offer locally in terms of what the capacity of local leisure and tourism sites are, and then equally how we feed that into our temporary accommodation procurement piece that we're looking at the moment, where we will have, or we're hoping to have, some on-site temporary accommodation as well, sort of a sleep pod type modular offer that we're looking at the moment. So just to say, there's a balance with all of this, in that we're conscious that, you know, often the project has a significant amount of negativity, that we're coming into the area and we're going to drink all the beer and stay in all the hotels, sort of thing. So we are very aware of that, and we're trying again to take an analytical approach of understanding the capacity locally. So quite keen, probably after this call, to explore that. We've done a little bit of work, probably a little bit further south, with Books BBF on the capacity locally, and I think we'd be quite keen to discuss that with you guys as well. There's a couple of questions, Matt. Shall I answer those now on the chat?
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah.
So, Jeanette, how many local contractors and how many local contractors will be used for earthworks? We're probably not at that stage yet to give the detail on the local contractors. That procurement process is in the final stages of being awarded. But what we've done, as I said earlier, in our procurement process, we're trying to contractually flow down the commitments that we're making to HS2 in terms of local engagement, local SMEs. So it won't just be issuing the contract to a great big company that come in from Scotland and then, you know, they get all of the work. It'll be trying to make sure that through our tier 2, tier 3 contractors, we're engaging local businesses as well. So I can't answer the earthworks contract yet, but it's likely in a couple of weeks that we'll have our strategic partners on board, and we'll be able to bring them onto calls like this. So we'll be able to get them onto the call to provide, you know, some real detail in the types of work that we're doing, the requirements that they'll have, and the support potentially that local businesses could offer. There's another question from Steve about direct recruitment, and is there a portal to apply through? So really good question, and something that we've battled with a little bit in the huge section of the country, 80-kilometre section, through different local authorities, different LEPs, you know, numerous different invested partners, whether it's DWP, Job Centre Plus, or supported agencies, charities that help people into work, and so on. And we're keen to be able to give them a single point of contact for where the jobs are on HS2 or on our contract. We have a website where our direct opportunities will be uploaded to. So the EKFB website shows our direct vacancies. There's a fairly detailed training section on our website where it explains the funded training that I mentioned earlier. But really, the majority of our opportunities are likely to be more commercial, procurement, management type vacancies that historically you tend not to make a huge impact on hard to reach groups locally or unemployed groups locally. It tends to be more the entry level type roles where you have the significant impact in those groups. So we're just working with HS2 to develop a portal, to develop a single point of contact, website based, that will have all of the vacancies for all of the projects, or all of that central, well, the whole of the project, And contractors will be mandated to upload their vacancies onto this portal. And then we're looking at having different job brokerage partners to support with the local engagement piece. So if it's Job Centre Plus, if it's groups like Advisor that have contracts locally to support the unemployed into work, if it's potentially colleges that will be signposting students to work placement and employment opportunities, we're just looking at how we can facilitate access or some sort of better access to those supporting groups so they can access the jobs in a little bit more detail. But yeah, that's a focus area at the moment that we're hoping over the next sort of 2-3 months we should be able to come out to market with that portal that will hold all of the vacancies. Okay.
And yeah, just looking at the questions, someone asked, I think, around how many businesses, or can we share businesses who are already working locally? So that level of detail will come, but we do keep track of, as HS2 Ltd, on some of the key contracts. So I just did a little quick check whilst Michael was answering that last question, and we're, I think, across Oxfordshire, Warwickshire and Bucks, there's probably about 250 businesses already working on the project. About 70, just doing some quick maths, about 75% of those are SMEs. So the project is really only just starting, but there are businesses already involved at a local level, which is good from our perspective. Yeah, I mean, just to finish off, because we've got a couple of slides left and then we can carry on. I mean, this slide really just talks about what we've already set out in terms of, there'll be a sort of sliding scale in terms of how you get involved at different points. So as well as the formal contracts that kind of Michael's touched on, and the kind of compete for aspect in terms of tendering for work and things, there'll also be the opportunity for things once the sites are up and running and compounds are up and running, for purchase orders and shorter form contracts, which would be kind of less onerous, I suppose, in terms of getting involved. They'll all still need to be open and transparent and fair. But there would be a sort of sliding scale in terms of complexity, in terms of requirements and things like that. And then the other piece which we touched on, which is tricky at the moment, given, as I mentioned earlier, we're in this sort of lockdown situation, is worker choice. So it's where our workforce spend their money, what they do with it. So we're keen to kind of work with you as an organisation to make sure we have a clear understanding of the local offer, so that we can put that into the compounds and into the work sites, so that people really understand, you know, rather than go to Sainsbury's or wherever it might be, you know, let's see if we can do something as organisations to kind of promote the local independent businesses that operate in areas. And just a quick one, just to follow up on those numbers around businesses. 2,000 businesses already working on the project. About half of those are local businesses. And so here's just a few examples, just to give you a flavour for how it works. So in the top right corner there, you've got a guy called Steve, who's from Total Reclaims Demolition. They're a neighbouring organisation. They're sort of relatively large. I would say they would come in kind of just below where EK are. So they would probably be, you know, one of EK's type of delivery partners. So they did some work for us in the Birmingham area. They demolished an old rail depot that will be replaced by the new Washwood Heath depot, which will maintain the trains that run on the network. And as part of their work, they contracted in Kirsty in the bottom left-hand corner. She works for a company called Jericho Wood Recycling. They're a social enterprise who kind of put people back to work by taking waste wood off site. So they do some really good work in and around the community, but they're also really successful and positive and efficient business that do things at a good price. So part of TRD's offer to our contractor was that they would involve these organisations, and that was kind of looked on favourably. So in terms of that quality element that Michael touched on. Then in the bottom right hand corner, you've got he's actually a very smiley gentleman, but we didn't get a very good picture of him. He looks a bit miserable there. But he runs all of our community engagement printing around the sort of Digbeth, Birmingham area. So he does all our notification letters, and he does all of our kind of reprographics and posters that we need. And then in the top left, they're a small company in a place called Coleshill, where we have a big site. Just in North Warwickshire, and they run and develop accommodation. So they're a really interesting company, very young. They turned up to one of our sites with an ice cream van during the hottest day of summer last year, and promoted their business. They started with one property, housing 4 workers, and they now have 85 HS2 workers staying with them across a range of properties that they've not only bought, but they've also renovated. And they also, part of their work and their kind of ethic is that they insist on apprentices being involved in every single project that they do, and they only hire people from their local community. So they're just a very interesting organisation and a good example of kind of, you know, we're talking here with Michael at quite a high level in terms of, you know, the scale of some of these contracts and some of this work that's being delivered. But as HS2 as a client, and certainly in my team, like the things that we're really interested in and that we're pushing people like Michael at an open door, I might add, to kind of look at is, where is the value added stuff here? Where is the stuff that really impacts on communities, both from a business economies perspective, but also, you know, social value aspect. So that stuff is already starting to happen in kind of a relatively small scale, and we're hoping that as things progress and the project picks up, you know, that we can only maximize those opportunities further. And then finally, here's some links that we'll share around afterwards. So the top left one, I think, is a useful one. So me and my team are keeping a track of all of the local businesses who are interested in being involved in the project. So if you go there, it's a really simple short form, who you are, what you do, and it comes to me and my team, and we keep a track of that. And we share that regularly with Michael, people like Michael and his team, but also across the route. So, you know, there's nothing to say you're a local business, but depending on what you do, there's nothing to say you could go and work in a Birmingham part of the route, or down in London, or anywhere else, really, depending on what you do and how you can operate. So we share that very regularly, and it just means that when it comes to things that sits maybe slightly outside of that more formal tender process, there's a resource there for our contractors to look at and understand what the local offer is. Compete for, absolutely great place to go. Register. It's maybe a little bit more involved than our registration form, but it's the place to be registered. You know, that's where you'll see opportunities as they go live. The in your area page in the red circle, that's where you can get updates on what's happening in terms of the construction. Our community engagement teams send out notifications from there ahead of road closures and all of those kinds of things. And then in the bottom left-hand corner, we've been delivering, actually, whilst this webinar's been on, we're delivering weekly Wednesday webinars on specific topics. If you go there, you can watch the previous videos. The 3 we've done so far, I think, would be really useful. So the first one is an overview and some top tips on how to get involved in HS2 if you're interested in tendering and being part of that more formal process. And there's some really, really useful information in there. The second one is a specific guide on how to use Compete For. So we got Compete For to come in, and they did a 45-minute session on how to register, how to get the most out of the platform, how to understand there's some intricacies to it that are kind of quite simple, but it's worth having the experts explain it to you to make sure that you're getting all of your notifications through. And then last Wednesday, we did one with Supply Chain Sustainability School. So they're a free resource that HS2 is a partner with. You can go there, register totally for free, access training and resources that will help upskill you. So if you want to know more about EDI policy or health and safety, all the things that are really important to HS2 as a project, you can go there and you can complete units, and those units are they're recognised by all of our main works contractors are signed up to that supply chain sustainability school. So a really good way to kind of to find out more about and to evidence the kind of requirements that we might be looking for as a project. So I think I'll leave that up on the screen, and then we'll share all of these links afterwards through the chamber, if that's okay. But yeah, I see we're running a little bit out of time, but if there's any questions, you know, now's the time. We're more than happy to kind of talk through them.
Thank you. Thank you. If anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask a question before we finish, I'd like to finish at 12 just to keep to time, but please shout. I certainly found that really interesting, and opportunity seems to be the word that comes to mind for me. Opportunity for businesses, individuals, all over the place. I love the example of someone turning up in an ice cream van and then being able to sort of organise a portfolio of properties for accommodation. Sounds like a great entrepreneurial
well,
step.
and that's the thing. I think
Yeah.
the more you see it, the businesses that are really going to benefit are the ones that, I mean, coming to things like this and just talking to us, you know, most businesses are already doing the things they need to do. It's kind of expressing that in a way that allows us to understand more.
Yeah. Could you, final question perhaps from me, if there's nothing from anyone else, the compounds, I think you mentioned 5 compounds, Michael, between throughout Buckinghamshire, Warwickshire and Oxfordshire. Where are those? Give me an idea of the scale of those in terms of numbers of people likely to be on those compounds.
Yeah, I can get. I'll send after this. I'll send a map around of the locations.
Okay.
But yeah, compound probably isn't the right word in that we're talking, you know, huge modular office blocks that can seat, you know, up to, well, depending on the compound, but between 200 and 800 people, depending on which of the compounds that would be up and down the route.
Yeah.
Some of those will have on-site sleeping accommodation.
Yeah. Interesting.
Some of those will be linked to, so that we're doing some work with the MOD base at Bicester, where there's some land that we're looking to acquire to build one of our bigger compounds at Bicester.
Yeah.
So it's a fairly strategic place from a rail freight terminal point of view as well. So it's a fairly good location. That's likely to be one of the bigger compounds.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll get some detail around on where those are.
Thanks. It's great. I found it really useful. Thanks, Michael and Matt, for sharing with us, keeping us up to date. Appreciate that. Appreciate we're a small group, but we will share this link. And I think there's definitely opportunities for us as a chamber to engage with you more in the coming months and years, and with other organisations across the region. I think really interesting as we sort of get our heads around the implications and the opportunities. So most appreciated. I know you sent round to Yasmin already the slides, so we'll share those this end as well. So thank you for that too. But yeah,
please send us anything else that you've any links that you've got, anything big or small. We're more than happy to share that for you on our social media and on our newsletters as well.
I think the web link, put yourself on the map, is probably one to for us to share and emphasise for local businesses. I haven't looked that up, but looking at the slide, that seems like a first place to begin.
Yeah, there's difference depending on the scale and size of the business. Definitely, if you're sort of a local business who's interested in a workforce or a new market potentially coming to your area, that's the one. If you want to go and tender for work more formally, compete for, those are the 2 places really that compete for absolutely 100%, because that's where all the opportunities will appear.
Okay.
I'd be quite keen to share some of the training opportunities that we've got as well. So probably catch up separately about that. We've got some,
that would be
mentioned funded training, so I'll share that around to the group.
Yeah, I mean, Paddy's known well to us, and he's spoken at chamber events in the past. So it's great he's with you, and we'll certainly like to link with you both. Thank you.